Coming up on this episode, plenty of news floating about with the Warriors in the last couple of days. So we'll go all through that, including training camp deals, the much-discussed starting lineup for opening night against the Phoenix Suns, and plenty more. So let's jump straight in. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you're all having a good week. Training camp coming up here for the Warriors and practically every other NBA team on October 2, but it feels like it's come a little bit early. The Warriors have been sharing plenty of photos and footage of players in the training facility, all but basically Steph Curry, who's just chilling in Dubai at the moment. And we also had press conferences from Mike Dunleavy Jr., the general manager, and head coach Steve Kerr on Monday as well. But before that, we had quite the comical signing for the Warriors, probably the funniest in recent memory, albeit it was just a training camp deal and not so much the 14th roster spot just yet. But that was, of course, Rodney McGruder, who has got quite the history with the Warriors, and in particular a couple of their veteran players in Draymond Green and Klay Thompson. You remember a game in 2021, Klay was out injured. He was actually on special commentary for the game, and afterwards the Warriors won it quite easily, 118-91. But at the end of the game, Rodney McGruder got in a little bit of a spat with Juan Toscano-Anderson, a little bit of a scuffle. And Klay was on commentary and produced one of the funnier lines in Warrior history, basically, where he said, "This dude might be out of the league soon. He's probably mad about that." And basically just roasted Rodney McGruder, to which Draymond backed that up in the post-match with this quote saying, "When the F did Rodney McGruder become the tough guy? I don't know, man. Everybody in the league tough these days. Walking over there talking shit like he a tough guy. Get the hell out of here. Effing tough guy, Rodney. Tough guy." It was quite hilarious at that time. And to be honest, the signing of Rodney McGruder, I think, threw everyone off guard. Being a Warrior fan, it's quite comical, as I said. Rodney McGruder, the player, being a long-time NBA veteran, being a very good role player across the course of his career. But his best season came in 2018-2019 with the Miami Heat. Obviously, was a starter for the Heat for a couple of seasons there. Averaged 7.6 points, 3.6 rebounds, and 1.7 assists in 2018-2019. The last three seasons he's played with the Detroit Pistons. Been a pretty highly effective three-point shooter over the last three seasons with the Pistons. Shot 42.3% from deep last season on 3 attempts per game, 39.7% the year before on 2.9 attempts per game, and in 2020-21 shot 45.8% on 1.5 attempts per game. But obviously, being a veteran player on the Pistons, it's hard to kind of evaluate your impact and your game overall. And to be honest, I'd be surprised if Rodney McGruder wins the 14th roster spot that's available coming into training camp. Not necessarily because of his history with the Warriors and, what's been said in the past between him and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, and also Juan Toscano-Anderson, who's seemingly going to be a part of the training camp battle as well, which adds another layer to the story. It's it just gets funnier and funnier, basically, the idea of it anyway. Not necessarily because of their history, though, but because at his age, I just don't think, a 6'4" wing. Obviously, that's what the Warriors are prioritising coming into camp, adding an extra wing. We had Mike Dunleavy Jr., not Mike Dunleavy Jr., but Anthony Slater report on that on Friday that the Warriors are looking at an extra wing rather than another big man, which we'll get into in a second. Rodney McGruder does fit the profile of that kind of 3-and-D wing option. I just think there's better options out there. The ones that we've talked about previously, I think Will Barton, Jalen Noel, they're the probably two guys that I would have above Rodney McGruder. He's probably on the same level of a Kent Bazemore. Bazemore obviously has the history of playing with the Warriors and the chemistry fit that comes with that, so he may even be ahead of Rodney McGruder. But, we'll wait and see. There hasn't been anything about Noel or Barton having training camp deals, but we'll probably find out more about that in the coming days. Steve Kerr, in his press conference on Monday, was asked about the starting lineup. I feel like he's going to be asked about the starting lineup every single press conference or media availability that he has until we get a confirmation here of what he's going to do. Now, most expect that it'll just be Chris Paul replacing Jordan Poole as the Warriors' sixth man, but obviously we've had reports over the offseason here that Chris Paul could in fact come into the starting lineup. And also CP3 himself has been quite hesitant to kind of put his hand up and say, yes, I'm more than comfortable with coming off the bench after that draft day trade back in June. Anyway, this is what Steve Kerr had to say about Chris Paul's addition to the Warrior roster and obviously the starting lineup and the potential around that. He said, we basically have 6 starters the way I look at it. Only 5 can go each night. I haven't decided yet what we're going to do. I want to see training camp. We're going to try different combinations and take a look. Obviously, all 6 guys are going to play a lot of minutes for us, but if this is going to work, everyone is going to have to embrace it regardless of who's starting and who's not. I do think that last sentence is probably the key point here. If this is going to work, everybody is going to have to embrace it regardless of who's starting and who's not. I think come training camp, we're going to see pretty early, I think Steve Kerr is going to see pretty early that the CP3, Steph, Klay, Wiggs, Dre lineup probably isn't overly fruitful to start games. Now, maybe they'll close some games. I think that's the most important thing if I'm CP3 anyway. I know he's never come off the bench in his entire career, over 1,200 plus regular season games across an 18-year career. But I'd be more concerned about closing games than I would be starting games. Is there a factor of, hey, I'm playing my old team, the Phoenix Suns, on opening night. I want to be able to start that game. Maybe, I don't know if there's the potential of, adjusting the starting lineup for game 1 and then going back to the traditional starting lineup of Steph, Klay, Wiggs, Dre, and Loon from there on in. Who knows? It would be a little bit weird, I suppose, for CP to come off the bench against the Suns on opening night. I'd understand that from his perspective, but we'll just wait and see what happens, and it feels like we're no closer to really getting a formalisation on the Warriors starting lineup from Steve Kerr heading into training camp. We're obviously probably going to see what happens the first preseason game against the Los Angeles Lakers on October 7th, so looking forward to that. In terms of Mike Dunleavy Jr.'s press conference, he was obviously asked about Dwight Howard and the Warriors' 2-day meeting with him that included workouts. It was weird reporting last week with Jason Dumas, stating that the Warrior veterans had signed off on adding Dwight Howard, only for basically 36 hours later, Shams Charania coming out and saying that Golden State weren't expected to sign Dwight Howard or any other veteran center before training camp. Tim Kawakami of The Athletic asked Dunleavy during his press conference about Dwight Howard specifically, and it was a generalised answer from Mike Dunleavy Jr. He didn't go into Dwight specifically, aside from saying the player you mentioned was just one of many that we brought in and evaluated. I think right now you'll know more about who we're inviting to camp in a couple of days, but overall we feel good about what we've done this summer. Did not want to mention Dwight Howard's name specifically at all, apart from saying the player you mentioned in reference to Kawakami's question. So it's a little bit weird for me that he wasn't willing to just talk about the whole Dwight experience. Now, he also added that 40 to 50 players had gone through the Warrior facility over the offseason that they've held workouts with, obviously with 2 roster spots available here, including the 14th one that will most likely get formalised before the start of the season, and then the vacant 15th one will probably hold until mid-season, and we'll just see kind of what plays out with the Warriors season from there. But Dwight Howard is not just one of the other 40 to 50 players that the Warriors held workouts with. He is an 8-time All-Star, a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, one of the best defensive centers in the history of the NBA, an MVP caliber player at one point with the Orlando Magic. Yes, it's a long, long time ago, a dozen plus years ago, but I still think he's a big enough name, a future Hall of Famer, where at some point, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, on Monday, but I think at some point that it's probably important Mike Dunleavy Jr. or someone in the Warrior organization does provide a little bit of clarity around what was the go with Dwight Howard, because we did get some conflicting reports about the veterans signing off on him and then obviously the Warriors seemingly going in a different direction. Afterwards, he did provide, Mike Dunleavy Jr. that is, did provide a little bit of an update on the Athletic NBA show with Anthony Slater and Sam Amick, basically saying that, we've got 5 centers available, and that, that seemed to suggest that the Warriors aren't necessarily looking for another center option. It did kind of, his inability, I suppose, to mention Howard specifically does suggest to me maybe like he still remains an option at some point. Otherwise, as I said, I do think that he could have provided more clarity with it without it being a controversial statement or anything towards Howard or the organisation. So we'll just wait and see, I suppose, what happens with Dwight and if he becomes an option. Obviously, mid-season, if the Warriors are down on big bodies at the 5 position, I think Dwight could certainly be, the number one option available. But, they have also held workouts with Dwayne Dedmon, Derek Favors, Tony Bradley as well. So there's no shortage of options. Now, whether they're good options or not is a different question altogether, but certainly they have done their due diligence, I suppose, on who may be available. In terms of the comment that he did make, though, about the 5 centers available, so obviously he's speaking about Loon, speaking about smaller ball options in Dre and also Dario Saric. And then he's clearly referencing the 2 younger guys, Trayce Jackson-Davis and Usman Garuba, the latter of which they obviously signed recently on a 2-way contract. I've spoken about that previously. Steve Kerr also had this to say about Trayce Jackson-Davis on Monday. He said, "What do I like about Trayce? He plays how we like to play. He's a good passer, a dribble handoff guy at the top of the key, a good screener. He gives us a lob threat that we don't otherwise have, which is a really nice addition. I think he's the kind of guy who feels the game well. He's got a good feeling for passing, cutting movement, and a lot of the stuff that we already run, he runs really well." So that just goes back and kind of reiterates my point that I had a few weeks ago about the Warriors kind of targeting Warrior-style players rather than necessarily athletic big guys who aren't going to have the feel for the game, the passing, the playmaking ability, the defensive versatility that Trayce Jackson-Davis and Usman Garuba have. And I think it's really important to note that this isn't just a Warrior off-season of looking at veteran players that fit the Golden State mold, like a Chris Paul, like a Dario Saric, like a Corey Joseph with their kind of IQ and passing ability, but also, doing that through the draft with Brandon Pajemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis and Garuba as well on a 2-way contract. So I think it's important to recognise that Trayce Jackson-Davis, TJD, and Usman Garuba, they could fill a hole here at some point during the regular season, and that's obviously the Golden State Warriors feel comfortable with having those 2 guys as their backup options and don't feel the need to go out and sign Dwight Howard or Dwayne Dedmon or Derek Favors or whoever it may be with that 14th roster spot. So we'll moving on from there. I just wanted to talk about the Warriors Plus Minus podcast, which if you haven't checked it out already, I'll leave a link to it in the description, with Anthony Slater, Tim Kawakami, and Marcus Thompson. Go check it out. Fantastic listen for 50 plus minutes. Those guys are obviously around the Warrior organization. Plenty of intel, plenty of information that is super valuable for fans. Just a couple of points that I wanted to talk about there. So there was the Klay Thompson contract extension discussion. Slater stated that it might happen, but obviously if it doesn't, he'll go into next offseason as a free agent. I do have a bit of an issue with one of Kawakami's points was the idea that the Warrior perspective does, the Klay Thompson injury history does hold a little bit of weight to the Warrior perspective, I should say. So I find that a bit awkward, to be honest, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall between, Mike Dunleavy Jr. and, Warrior front office and, ownership, Joe Lacob if he's there, and also Klay Thompson's camp and his management. In those discussions, if the Warrior front office brings up, the fact that we've paid $68 million for this guy to miss 2 complete seasons, obviously with the ACL in 1920, the Achilles in 2021, missed another half a season after that, returning in January of 2022. If they use that as a way to try and get Klay on a lesser deal here moving forward, I think that's going to be awkward. I think that's got the potential to be an awkward situation. For you to tell Klay Thompson, hey, you know what? We paid you 2.5 seasons, upwards of $70 million across that period to not play. So therefore, you should take less on your next deal. Now, I actually understand their point, if that is the case. And Kawakami basically said that this is in the Warriors' minds when they're dealing with a potential Klay Thompson extension. He said that. Again, very awkward if that is the case. And I understand it. I understand that, hey, I invested $189 million into you across a 5-year deal, and for half of that period, I saw no return. You were off the floor the entire time. So from a business perspective, I get it. Like, that makes sense. But Klay would rightfully, and this is what Slater pointed out, Klay would also rightfully turn around and say, hang on a second, what was the value of this franchise when I was drafted here in 2011? And what's its value now? Between myself, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green, we've brought 4 championships to this franchise. The valuation of the Warriors when Joe Lacob and Peter Guber bought the organization was, I think they bought it for $450 million. According to Forbes, as of October 2022, it's about $7 billion. There is no issue with money at the Golden State Warriors. Let's put it that way. Now, if you're talking about the second tax apron and the new penalties that the NBA is putting towards the Warriors and other luxury tax-paying teams, then yes, that is a clear point of emphasis here. And the Warriors will say to Klay, hey, we either want to get close to the second tax apron or ideally we want to get under it. And in order to get under it, you need to take a significant pay cut. He's getting $44 million this season. The Draymond Green contract has been the one that has been bandied about as, 4-year 100, Klay, there you go. That's about what you should get. Maybe the Wiggins is 4-year 109, somewhere between $100 and $110 million. Now, I do think that with Klay's shooting ability, look, he shot 41.2% from 3 last season. He's another year removed from his 2 major injuries. He should be better again, I think, this season. I think there's optimism around that. So I think if he did test the free agency market, maybe he gets more than that. But there also has to be, from a Warrior perspective, there has to be a little bit of a home team discount. Like, would Klay Thompson prefer 4 years 100 at the Golden State Warriors, or would he prefer to go to the Houston Rockets and play alongside Dylan Brooks or something for 4 years 130? If I'm the Warriors, I'm just saying, good luck. If you want to go do that and take an extra $30 million to do that, go for it. But I think there's a clear understanding here that there wants to be a long-term reunion between Klay and the Warriors from both sides. It's just about how much of a pay cut does he take. And I just think it could get awkward if the Warriors use Klay's injury history, the fact he missed 2.5 seasons, as leverage over him and over his camp in negotiations. I just think that's awkward. I think that's the last thing I'd kind of do. Like, if you really couldn't get an extension done, then maybe things get really difficult and you bring that up. But ideally, you just say, look, we're trying to get under the second tax apron. This is the number that we want to give you in order to be able to do that. And obviously, it's going to depend on what happens this season. Who knows? Chris Paul might come out, win 6th Man of the Year, and the Warriors might say, hey, we just won the championship or something. Let's pick up Chris Paul's contract, which is non-guaranteed $30 million for next season. Let's pick that up. And we'll just say, yep, we're going in over the second tax apron again and copping the penalties. Maybe that happens. Who knows? But I think they would have a number in mind for Klay Thompson, that is comfortable enough for them to hopefully get under the second tax apron. Moving on, another comment that Kawakami actually made during that podcast, which I slightly disagree with. I agree with most of the takes that those guys have. One of the things I did disagree with was the Moody Kuminga debate, and they kind of argued about where JK is in the rotation, and made the argument that there are going to be nights where he plays 7-8 minutes where he's the 10th or 11th man in the rotation. I just completely disagree with the notion that Kawakami had that Moses Moody is above Jonathan Kuminga in the rotation right now heading into this season. Now, I understand Moses was really impressive during the postseason. He had a really tough regular season last year. And then come playoff time, nicknames stay ready for a reason, right? Made an impact in the playoffs when it didn't, seemingly look possible for him after what had happened in the regular season. And we're talking about a guy who averaged 13 minutes across, I think, 63 regular season appearances last year, as opposed to Jonathan Kuminga, who averaged 20.8. Now, yes, he was axed from the rotation. Wiggins came back for the playoffs. JK basically sat the whole of the first and the second round series for the Warriors. But I just don't think that we should put all our weight into that and just completely forget about what we saw in the regular season last year, which was a really impressive regular season from Jonathan Kuminga, where he took giant strides on both ends of the floor, particularly defensively, guarding some of the best wings in the NBA, Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic, these types. I just don't think that we should take 100% of what we saw in the playoffs and just apply that to this season, starting out moving forward. I just don't think that is an understandable expectation heading into this season. I think that what we should say is, hey, maybe these two guys are on an even keel, and it's really going to come down to training camp, the different combinations that Steve Kerr sees during training camp and during preseason. And if anything, I would have JK ahead of Moses in the rotation. I just would. I think he's a more talented option. Now, the argument for Moses is that he fits into more lineups, and that is ultimately why we saw him in action during the postseason. Is that Steve Kerr was desperately looking for a fifth guy outside of Steph, Klay, Wiggs, and Dre to plug into the lineup. He tried JaMychal Green. He obviously had Loon for periods, and Moses Moody ended up playing significant minutes for the Warriors in that second round series against the Lakers. Obviously, GP2 was another one in there as well. So there are going to be options for Steve Kerr available. He also spoke on Monday in his press conference about Dario Saric coming in and the kind of opportunities that could open up for the Warriors, and specifically Jonathan Kuminga in terms of Saric coming in as a stretch big, as a three-point shooting, fantastic passing big man, which I did find a little bit comical because I thought it was a slight dig at JaMychal Green. Steve Kerr did say that we just didn't have a shooting big last season. We had Otto Porter and Belly the year before. We just didn't have one last year. Well, you kind of did. Like, JaMychal Green shot 38% from three. But I do understand where he's coming from. Like, JaMychal Green was very inconsistent. He shot 38% from three, but I don't think it ever really felt like that. It felt more like he was below league average, like 33, 34%. It's quite a surprise to see him at 38% at the end of the season. Defensively, not doing a whole lot. And I think particularly offensively, the passing. Like, JaMychal Green is in no way a playmaker by any means. He's not going to, get on the roll and kick out to an open corner shooter. He's not going to be at the top of the key with the ball in his hands, spotting cutters and stuff like that, which is what Dario Saric is going to do. So I don't think it's necessarily just the three-point shooting, but I think it's more importantly the passing element and the playmaking that Dario Saric can provide. And if you put him next to JK in the second unit, I think that's a great mesh between those two players in the front court at the 4 and the 5. You have the playmaking and the shooting of Dario, and you have the defense and the athleticism of JK. I think that combination will work really well together. And obviously they will get different moments, with JK. I still think he'll get his moments next to Loon or next to Dre. And Saric will obviously get his moments next to Loon and next to Dre as well. I just think Dario Saric, he could be the closer, or in the closing lineups, I should say, for the Warriors, a lot more than what people may think this season. Let's just put it that way. I'm really excited to see what Dario Saric can do for the Warriors. But my whole point is I just disagree a little bit with the idea that Moses Moody is certainly above Jonathan Kuminga in the rotation. I do agree that he still probably fits into more lineups and different combinations more effectively and better than JK does. But I think JK, he's got the ability here to really skyrocket, really take a major leap that I just don't think Moses Moody's quite got. Now, obviously, JK's got, the higher upside in his game, and I just don't think we should be putting that aside and saying, this guy's 10th, 11th man in the rotation. He's going to have nights where he, plays 7-8 minutes. I also think the big thing with JK is we saw at times last season when Steph and Wiggs were out, that he almost became the third scoring option behind like Klay and JP. And you are going, regardless of the new resting policies, regardless of that, the Warriors are still going to have plenty of nights where they either got legitimate injuries to their veteran players because they're bloody old, or those guys are going to rest. Now, obviously, Steph and CP being over 35, they can rest on either side of a back-to-back under the NBA's new resting policy. That's fine. So I just think with JK, there are going to be nights during the regular season you actually might need him to go out and get you 20 to 25 points in order to have a chance of winning. He might be your third best scoring option. So if that is the case, when there is a full rotation, I think you still need to give him his 15 to 20 minutes to keep him engaged, because I think it's hard to expect that oh, JK, you've played 30 minutes total over the last 4 games. Oh, now we're playing in Indiana on a Wednesday night. We actually need you to go out, play 30 minutes and score 20 to 25 for us to have a chance to win. Like, I just think that's an unfair expectation on a young player. He's 20 years of age. So just to keep him engaged, I think it's important that, he plays 15 to 20 minutes a game. And then, of course, as I said, he's going to have his games where he's needed for 25, 30 minutes, because there's some injuries or because, there's a couple of players resting, whatever it may be. So I'd be surprised. I would be surprised if Moses Moody plays more in the regular season than Jonathan Kuminga does. Let me just put it that way. Anyway, we'll finish it up, the episode there, guys. Thanks for listening if you've made it this far. Remember, you can tweet me or X, whatever it is, post to me on X, whatever it may be, at POC252, POK252. If you're watching or listening on YouTube, please leave a comment below. Let me know what you're looking forward to in the Warriors season coming up. Please subscribe if you haven't already as well. And, of course, you can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Other than that, guys, enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll be back soon.